Okay, let's get started. Good evening. Welcome everyone to the Parrish Art Museum. My name is Corinne Ernie. I am the chief curator here, and it gives me great pleasure to have three wonderful artists tonight with me. They're all part of the exhibition that is currently on view, Artists Choose Parrish. And the concept of the exhibition is that we invited artists with a deep connection to the East End to choose works from the collection. And we left them quite a bit of freedom to choose several works or just one work, whatever spoke to them. And I hope you have seen the exhibition, but feel free to go and see it after the talk. We're open until 8 o'clock. And I think they came up with some really incredible and very touching stories about the East End, about the collection, about the relevance of this museum to this place, even to artists of today. So I want to thank a few people. I want to thank our sponsor, Corcoran Group, but I also want to let you know that we have books from each of the artists in the shop, just as you walk out to your left. So please take a look. And without further ado, I would like to introduce each of them. To my left, Jeremy Dennis, then Sam Moyer, and Enoc Perez. And each of them are going to give you a little overview of their work, and then we're going to have a conversation. So I want to start with Jeremy Dennis. Thank you.
Thank you, Corinne. Should I also control the slides with the clicker? Okay. So hello, everyone. Good to see you this evening. My name is Jeremy Dennis. I'm an artist and photographer from the Enoc Indian Nation in Southampton, New York. I've been based here on the East End for 30 years now, doing mostly digital photography. And what we're seeing on the slide is really the start of my career on the East End. I worked closely with Corinne Ernie to do a solo exhibit for the Parrish Roadshow back in 2018 called Stories. And we curated a selection of personal images from a series looking at indigenous legends, myths, dreams, experiences, and most of them pulling from Algonquin or Northeastern tradition. And so this is an installation that's at the Duck Creek Art Center in Springs, New York. On top of looking at sort of typical art history content or looking at creation stories, I also do a lot of delving into archives. I like looking into history, the history of Long Island, and everything from Brooklyn to Montauk. And so this is a still from a website from a project that I run called On This Site, Indigenous Long Island. And so I've been working on this project since 2016, thanks to a nonprofit called Running Strong for American Indian Youth. And when I was in my mid-20s, I started this project, and for the first time in my life, I was learning about Long Island's Native history. So just trying to fill that gap, allow it to be accessible and free for future generations was part of the goal. But for those of you who don't really like spending time on the computer, it's also a traveling exhibit and a self-published book, which is available in the Parrish gift shop. Part of this project was just the fact that we as Enoc and our neighboring sister tribes on Long Island and the greater area have been here for more than 10,000 years. So how do you compress that into one project? So I eventually decided to branch out into different themes, into different concepts. And so for the Artists Choose Parrish exhibit, I pulled from a series called Sacredness of Hills. And so for us Enoc people, for thousands of years, we've been using hilltops as sacred burial sites. And so this is one of many images from that series. And the actual image from the Parrish show that's on view now is on slide now, what you're seeing on the slide. And so this is actually shot in Santa Fe, New Mexico, while I was at residence there. And it actually looks like the Enoc Hills, very much like the William Merritt Chase depiction that you see accompanying my piece. So it's really interesting that we have a contemporary version of that. I also just want to mention these two other projects that I'm really passionate about. One is called Rise. I had a piece here, I believe it was a year or two ago here at the Parrish, and it's really a project that now that you have this map of Long Island and all these ancestral places, as an indigenous person and someone who likes playing with trickster themes, which is in native culture, how can you depict reoccupying those lands? On top of that, I'm just going to mention briefly Ma's House. This is a communal art space that I'm running along with family and my partner Brianna and many supporters. It's on the Shinnecock Reservation. We started in 2021 thanks to over 400 people who donated towards the project. And of course, everyone probably recognizes April and Eric on the slide. This is on the front stoop. But thank you. Just a brief overview. Pass it to Sam.
Thank you. Hi, thank you. That was very nice, thank you. I'm a little bit more new to Long Island. I started coming here in 2007. And I started coming here because I actually had a studio visit with Linda Banglis, and she hired me to be her studio assistant on the spot, which was great. But I don't know if anyone's ever met Linda, but it's kind of a wild ride with Linda. And she sent me to her house in the Hamptons, and I had never traveled over there before. And so I took these ferries over, and I was really just astounded by how beautiful the landscape was and blown away by it. And I grew up in Indiana, spending a lot of time on Lake Michigan in Miller Beach, and there was something about like the quality of the landscape that just really like stirred up a deep nostalgia for me that I think I just sort of stored it in the back of my mind and was like, well, that was a beautiful place I went to. And then 2011, I didn't go back until 2011, and then I was like, oh my God, I forgot. I like felt home here. And my husband and I rented a house, and we've been out here ever since. So this is the first body of work that really was inspired by the landscape of Long Island, and I would make these very large dyed paintings where I would put huge scrolls of canvas out into these fields with ink, and they became actual prints of the land, sort of depending on where I put them and how much moisture was in the air and if it was raining, and then they'd turn into these large mounted works. And so they sort of had a relationship with printmaking, photography, sculpture, land art. They crossed many genres in their creation. And with this particular show, I was trying to create an illusion of overhead light in these paintings because I knew they were destined to go to this specific spot. And I loved the skylight in here, so I originally studied photography, and so editing has always been the skill set I hold dearest. And I basically cropped these paintings to make it seem like there's always an overhead light occurring within the frame. So basically the overview I'm giving you of my work right now is work that's really relating to Long Island versus all the other stuff I've been up to the last 20 years. And then this is a sculpture I did on Fisher's Island, which I actually made on site, and all of the aggregate in the concrete is the stone from the actual location. So we poured the concrete on site and hand packed all the stone into there. And that really was my first time creating a sculpture on site that was made of the actual earth and space that it occupied. And that inspired this very large project I did for Central Park in 2020, where these arches that are on the exterior of this sculpture are actual bluestone mined from New York. So I was thinking, which is also the stone that is primarily the material of Central Park itself. And so this project was inspired basically by the concept of the other sculpture. I'll scoot through these for you. And then the marble is from all over the world, but then bought through New York spaces that would usually be places you would go to buy materials for your countertop or your hotel lobby or the interior decorative spaces of New York. And so in this way, it's sort of really about like the larger global community of New York and then also the actual bedrock of the land. And then this is what I'm more well known for. I make these paintings that are made from found marble, which or remnants really, like cast-offs from people's interior design projects or whatever. I buy the scrap and then I make these paintings with the scrap. And the surround that you see around the marble is either painted canvas mounted to wood or it's plaster and stone. I'm gonna just kind of scoot through this so that, I'm just trying to give you some scale here. That's also a large sculpture I've made. Again, my work is always trying to sort of tap dance between sculpture, painting, photography. How do I have it be everything at once? This is a painting that's actually up at the Longhouse right now with Object Thing. And then I'm just going to end on this new project that is going to be opening on Friday at a gallery called Chapter in New York. And basically, this is something I started a long time ago, but this happens in studios. You do something, and 5 years later, you're like, oh, yeah. And so I'm on the North Fork, the very tip of the North Fork, and we have these beautiful seawalls that were built on location with the actual aggregate of the beach. The stone of the beach is the aggregate and the concrete, which is sort of a mirroring of these other sculptures that I've made, paintings I've made in the past. And they've eroded into these objects that just look like beautiful sculptures to me. And so I took my medium format camera out, I photographed them, and then I built these frames with concrete, and then the aggregate of the frames is the stone from the beach. So it's sort of like a meta of the new version of what these once were holding them. Anyway, that's it. Thank you.
Hi, cool. My name is Enoc, Enoc Perez. I was born and raised in Puerto Rico, came to New York at age 19 to go to school. Decided to go to study art, so my father required that I go to New York. We didn't have internet in those days, so he was right about coming to New York. I go forward? Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want me to face?
Okay, yeah, that's me. Okay. I came to the South Fork in 2009 when the market crashed. I was looking in the North Fork, all the artists of my generation, but with the market crash, it became possible to buy down here, so why not? So sorry, it doesn't sound like very loyal.
The North Fork is nice too, okay?
Yeah, no, I just don't care. But I'm not a favorite of my own generation anyway, so it's cool. So I'll tell you about myself. I come here in 1986. I was very conscious of making painting that would relate to the artwork of the New York, for my money, who were the New York masters. Was thinking Andy Warhol, Bob Rauschenberg, Christopher Wu. All these people, all these artists use the process of printmaking they use printmaking to make painting. So that interests me. So I thought maybe if I use a printmaking method to make these paintings, maybe I'll be up to something. Because you have to make sense within the context you're in. So I start with this little thing. I made that in 1992. And I made that painting after seeing a color Xerox machine. And I noticed that it had 4 colors. So by that time, I was doing my own printmaking method, which is I apply oil paint on the back of a piece of paper, and I take that piece of paper with the oil paint and put it on the canvas, and I draw whatever needs to be drawn on the canvas, kind of like carbon paper. Remember, when we used to write checks, carbon paper is a primitive way of printmaking, but it puts me on printmaking, which is, to me, in my mind, that relates to like my favorite artist. I also end up on the East End because I saw, as a young guy, a picture of Julian Schnabel coming out of his pool with a brush in his hand, and he was like heavy, and he looked well fed, and I wanted to be him, So that to give you an idea of how I land here. So this is when I discovered I discovered my own way of painting. By that time, I was young, but I was getting divorced. For 6 or 7 years, I lived in bars, developed a bad alcoholism problem, but that's besides the point. So I started to make paintings of women that I would meet at bars, and I couldn't approach them. I had like zero game, and I was too depressed anyway to be with anybody. So I would ask them, can I take your picture? And would go home to the studio, and I would make these shrines to them. That got me a lot of sympathy because they said it was pathetic at the time, which, it's cool, it's where I was. So that's until, I'm trying to do this as fast as I can, until I made this little painting. I made this painting because I meet my wife today, like 21 years ago, and at the time, my wife was married to a different guy, and I wanted to do a show about her in code. So I knew the story of this building. This building is a hotel in Puerto Rico that was made by a Puerto Rican architect, sort of a love letter to his French wife. My wife is French, so I thought, oh, this is like a portrait of her. Painting stays in my studio for like 2 weeks, and it's one of those eureka moments. Like, oh, look, this architecture on canvas, it looks like a ready-made in the Duchampian sense of the word. So I said, well, let's look at more architecture. Plus, I couldn't be painting people I met at bars because she wouldn't be happy with it. So started to look at architecture. I also had a very good library of architecture. I always been like a big architecture groupie. So it was like a natural to me, and I felt like these hotels belonged to me. The weird thing is that these hotels also are symbols of the colony. So, at the time I said that I wasn't just interested in the architecture because I wanted to get into the New York art world. And, it was fine. Later I started talking about the colony. Interesting about this is that they become symbols of our own identity in the same way for Puerto Ricans. And this is how Jeremy's work is resonating with me enormously. I read in Jeremy's statement that people actually love the landscape of the place, but they don't like the inhabitants, and which is precisely our case. I'm just, so I play on those parts. Started to make pictures of rum bottles. At the time, really not consciously. To me, they work like self-portraits. They read Puerto Rican rum, and they're beautiful. And they're also another false promise. You look at this advertisement, the promise is that you're going to fall in love, you're going to get laid, you're going to be rich and good-looking. Not true. Same with the hotels almost, too. You're going to have a good time, you're going to fall in love. And I know that's a lie. At the same time, that I feel like that's part of me. So I'm like the guy with like Stockholm syndrome, in a way. And it's interesting. It's different process, how identity gets processed, You have to see that the native population in Puerto Rico was exterminated very efficiently by the Spanish. So at the time, followed up with architecture. This was a painting I made. I got a friend of mine, he runs a fashion company, has this museum in Italy, and he said, do something about Italy. So I did Casa Malaparte, which I knew from the Godard movie, Contempt, or Le Mépris, as the French call it. So I did a day and a nighttime, classical painting subjects. And it took me 3 years to come up with that idea, which is so obvious. But, anyway. And, people started bringing me their buildings. When I was doing the portraits of the girls, people would bring me their wives to make portraits. At this point, people started to bring me their buildings. So this is the Lever House, a masterpiece by any standard, right there in Park Avenue in New York. Did that. That was at the Corcoran Art Gallery. They gave me the rotunda, so I made a painting of Watergate, Like it was like 59 feet by like 14 feet, so I rented a space uptown. Anyway, but it was important for me to put Watergate. It was during the Obama years. I wish it was during the Trump years, but and you see, this is the architecture. It starts to, I can also use my method of like that printmaking to different effects. These are more about texture and abstraction. These stem from, I made this in 2011 to 2012. The gallery at the time told me it was too big to show in the gallery and no client would want them. So I called my friend at the Corcoran and she said, oh, I'll show them. I'm like, awesome. So we sent that, and you can see the abstraction in it, and it stems from a show, Cy Tomley show that I saw in 2005 of the Bacchus paintings. They were red paintings, and I remember going to see the show with my friend, and he was drenched in red. And for years, I tried to make those paintings, so I came up with these. More architecture, the Tate Modern, you see, it becomes more abstracted, that's in Switzerland. I really like the Tomley like fountain. Then, again, like I'm into like doing, this is Philip Johnson's glass house. This is the painting bunker there. So I had these paintings that I made of the Lipstick Building in Manhattan, and I was fortunate enough to like put them in there. And the bragging rights are great. 15 years after, like actually almost 20 years after the towers fell, I was able to like address the subject. Not my favorite thing to do, but it took time to like even like address it. I addressed it, and in the first time I addressed it with sculptures. I learned to do sculptures in my studio here. I have a 2-car garage here, and I turned it into a studio. And it allows me to do things that I don't want people to see generally, because nobody comes to visit me here. So, like in 7 years, I trained myself to make something decent. So I made sculptures that look like all the 9/11 tributes around Long Island, that they're pieces of metal. So I wanted to make sculptures that look like those pieces of the building that are all around here. They spoke to me, because that was probably the worst day of my life, or most of our lives. 2016, blah, blah. The whole question of being American has always been like a big deal for me, because on paper I'm American, but I certainly, especially since 2016 to now, we're not seen as Americans. So, so I started to make embassies, American embassies around the world. And that beautiful vision that they had, I mean, look at this one. That was in Iraq before it became like a bunker. And they hired the best, like great architects to do this. That was another show about Philip Johnson, which is a figure I'm like really on the fence about, but it's not my job to judge these people. But when you say, this is a chapel in Texas, so they asked me to put paintings in it, but all the walls were round, so I couldn't really do it. So I made chairs and left them there. That was part of what's Philip Johnson saying? Anyway, at that time I decided, after Philip Johnson, I decided not to do more architecture. So a friend of mine suggested, why don't you paint interiors? And thought it was a bad idea. A month later, I'm painting interiors. This is where the Stones recorded Exit on Main Street. It's a castle in the south of France, and the album, a complete masterpiece again. So as you see, I'm painting from admiration. Like this is like my list of cool. This is a picture of Hugh Hefner's private jet. I mean, it's unreal. But that's another, there are figures that are interesting in our culture. Carlo Molino in Italy. Actually, I've done a lot of work about him. I think it's interesting. Paulinda Rothschild, Mick Jagger, and Jerry Hall. That was a show just so you get an idea of the size. Then recently, coming back to like the original subjects, but a little bit more conscious about it. And this is a pool of one of the hotels in Puerto Rico. Again, resonates with me, with Jeremy, is that there's no people. I take the people off for you. I know that everybody that comes to Puerto Rico, they don't come to see us. You know, I don't even know if I would go to see anybody in a country, so I don't forgive it, but I know the only thing that we have that's undeniable is the landscape, and that's real. You know, that's one of the hotels at night. That's the Dorado Beach Hotel, created by Rockefeller, actually, and back in the 50s, created a natural conservancy around it. Today it's a hideout for people that don't pay taxes. You know, the crypto and all these billionaires, they hang out there. For me, it's mine, but I understand how it's another false promise. More romance. You see that one almost looked like heavenly. Anyway, that's it.
Wow. Thank you. I think I'll never look at your painting in the same way again. There's so much packed in there, so thank you. I want to talk a little bit about what I found as a common thread in all of you, the relationship to place in your work. Place, but also the material from the place in many different ways that you work with. Maybe, Jeremy, start with you. Can you talk a little bit more about what this place means to you, how it influences your work, and especially also with your transition to running an artist residency as, I would say, almost part of your own practice, right?
Sure. Well, I think land and place and so intertwined with Shinnecock itself and identity. So just to give context, hopefully this is common understanding. Shinnecock people have been here for so long. We've endured so many things throughout history, from enslavement, colonization, genocide, forced removal. And so throughout all of that, one thing that is retained within identity is connection to land, and just the story of Shinnecock's resilience to retain on our ancestral landscape is amazing, and yet massively understood, not as understood as it should be, I should say. And so as an artist, that gives you a lot of opportunity to try to fill in the gap of representing that story and trying to depict it, celebrate it as much as possible. And so thinking about land, of course, land is something that is top of mind. It's like cutting edge in art conversations. How do we address it as a nation? And how do we have better relations with indigenous people is something that I consult on a lot. And so when I think about Shinnecock and Southampton and the Parrish and land itself, I think a lot about just the conflict that is there and the unsolvable problems of everyone wanting to claim the same space, no one wanting to rectify the situation. And so for the Parrish show, I chose William Merritt Chase's, I believe it's 1894 landscape of the Shinnecock Hills. And as Enoc said, it's a beautiful place, but it's absent of Shinnecock people. So it says Shinnecock, but it doesn't say or represent the actuality of that moment. And so this is a common thread throughout early American art history, the idea of this is a beautiful landscape. You all have to come from the supposed old world to the supposed new world to occupy this new tabula rasa. And they depicted it as, well, this is the area that we civilized. We put the plantations and everything here. And then on the west side of the composition of the canvas, that's the wilderness that is just nature. It's uncivilized. And there might be primitives there, or there may not be. And so I would extend this even to the 19th century with William Merritt Chase. He was trying to work with Miss Hoyt to turn the Shinnecock Hills into something profitable. So they were real estate developers. Miss Hoyt convinced Chase to create a art village, and that was the early form of what we know as gentrification today. And so I really wanted to accompany that history, that piece, with a Shinnecock voice and show that we're still here. And in the person in the photograph itself is looking to themselves, seeing if they actually exist. It's almost as if they're a ghost to those around this person. And so it's actually adorned by a very similar frame as the Chase painting. The Chase one is, of course, in a golden, beautiful frame. Mine is in a white frame that's a little bit more camouflaged, for lack of a better word. And it's supposed to represent the actual connection Shinnecock people have with this institution. And so Samuel L. Parrish was a proprietor. He also was a lawyer for the Long Island Railroad. And so a lot of the wealth that he gained was through the loss of Shinnecock land through forgery and other means. And so in many ways, Shinnecock people are the reason we're all sitting here. And I wanted to highlight that fact. Besides that, I was also doing research. I'm not very articulate like my cousin Tila Troge, who's a genius and could just lecture for hours on this subject and the history. But related to the parishes is William Penn. There's the Quaker in Pennsylvania history and how they gained that wealth in the first place. And with the case of the Lenni Lenape, it was famous that the William Penn son made an agreement with the Lenni Lenape people, and they said that we want to establish a colony here, and however far we can walk in one day, that's how much land we want. And that land surpassed 1 million square acres of land. And so that was one way to deal with the indigenous people there, and descendants of William Penn came to New York and did that same thing. And so this is something that is common knowledge, and we're still waiting as Shinnecock people for this to be addressed. And so going back to Corinne's question about Ma's house and starting new spaces, we do need new ways of looking at history. We need new lenses. We need people in these communities to tell our own story, to be truthful, and take the risk of putting yourself out there, sometimes like biting the hand that feeds you in a way, just because I love the parish, but it's just conflict. There's conflict there. So I think that's something that we all have to engage with. We can't turn away from. It's part of who we are. We are 0.7% of the population here in Suffolk County, but we all share this history. This is all something that we have to work on, no matter where you are, where you're coming from. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you for bringing this to the parish, because I think it's an important discourse and conversation to have. And I think it's great to do this through art. I mean, you're an incredible artist, and I think it's just important to take that as a starting point to sort of reveal the history of this place, and to also look at what is the relationship now, what can we do, how can we work together, what can we do to improve that relationship. So thank you. Sam, I'm curious about your relationship to the land here, and in general to land. I mean, the way you use the marble in your, what you call them, painting, which I find interesting, because to me they're also sculptures. But I mean, the stones that you used in Central Park is obviously from the ground, is from the place, and I guess what you're using here is also from here, or is it from? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, the site specificity of using the material from the place is just such a no-brainer for me of a way to connect to, how do I ground a concept? How do I ground it in something? But I think in a lot of, basically I grew up moving a lot. Okay. I moved a lot, and I had a lot of projected identity through my parents, but the only real connection I ever had to anywhere was really just the physicality of where I was, because we were this unit of we have these types of personalities and we care about these types of things in the world, but we were always sort of tourists in a way. And so having this sense of not really being from anywhere, you get this heightened, sensitivity to the physicality of the space that you're in. And something that always was a recurring thing in the places I lived was this mashing up of the man-made with nature. So like the lake of Miller Beach is between two steel mills. So you go to this beautiful beach, it's between two steel mills. There's always this presence of like industry and man-made smashing right up to the nature. And I spent the majority of my youth in LA. And I grew up like pretty middle class there, being a kid that, you know, explored, like I spent all my time in the LA River and exploring these sort of trespassing in these spaces that were, you know, man trying to control nature. It were, you know, these basins that were just huge concrete pores right through the center of these like natural preserves, and trying to make it so that this space that we shouldn't inhabit was inhabitable, right? And so I think that that is a theme that just I always continue to return to, is this moment where like man-made meets nature. And, you know, there's more delicate moments like these beautiful fossilized walls of the North Fork. Right. And then there's more intense moments like Central Park meeting Midtown, or just, you know, cities in general. So I think that that is a way that I sort of like my identity floats into the actual makeup of like what I'm working with. And I think that the relationship between two things, like the stone paintings aren't just about the stone, it's really about the relationship between the stone and the painted background and the material of the painted background. And, you know, the contrast between the two creates a larger thing. The relationship itself creates the thing that is, you know, sort of a more defining, larger view. So especially with those paintings, like the marble is very shiny and then the background is very matte and you have to engage your body and move around it, so that relates it back to sculpture. And I don't know, I think that that's a similar way with landscape, where it's like you can, it's like the hotels on the beach. It's the same thing. It's this like, if you're standing in the perfect position, it's one thing, and then you turn around and it's a totally different world.
Yeah,
and so I
exactly.
think that it's the same concept with all the art objects that I try to make.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you talk about trespassing, because I feel like you're trespassing common knowledge of art making. You know, it's like, I mean, I don't think I've ever seen anyone making that kind of like composite of that heavy marble and the way you integrate it into a canvas.
Yeah,
So.
I mean, the material, you know, that's, I think it's because I went to school for photojournalism, and then I felt restrained. But I actually went to the Corcoran for photojournalism, and then 9/11 was my first day of college.
Oh boy.
And I quit photojournalism because everybody ran to go take photos of the State Department. I was like, I don't think so, guys. But I think jumping from photography into fine art, I just never wanted anything to be so sacred or precious. And I always felt outside of the conversation of painting, and then I felt outside the conversation of photography, and I felt like these boundaries that people put around these like sacred practices of like, this is my thing, don't, you know,
Right.
step on the toes of, you know, whatever, the rules. Yes, this is how you get to like learning how to mess around and take challenge.
It's a great way to mess around.
Yeah.
I'm curious about your choices. Enoc, you've talked a lot about your own work, and it's really a big revelation, I have to say, to hear you talk and how you arrived at, you know, the work that you're making now.
Trust me, I'm having revelations here, like Jeremy, like with, you know, with the guy coming out of the pool. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And like with you, the trespassing, like it is a way to progress. I mean, even though I don't want anybody trespassing on my property, but art-wise, it's about killing your father, you know.
Yeah.
So I totally on with that.
So you actually chose a father of abstraction, abstract expressionism. You're killing Hans Hofmann.
No, I'm not killing him. No, I was going through the collection. I like the figure of Hans Hofmann. I think he's completely underrated artist for his generation, and I relate to that because I never been entered. You know, I never been in the kingdom. You know, I never peaked as an artist. I'm 55. You know, I'm fighting for it not to happen after I'm dead, because everybody's favorite artist is the dead artist. We know that. But I think Hans Hofmann emigrated, came here like after World War II, and did the work he wanted to do. And early on, I responded to those paintings strongly. So I'm going through the collection, and I see this picture that seemed to have almost the same sense of humidity of the pool that I painted, of that
That green,
painting,
right?
that
Like
green.
that swampy green.
And
Yeah.
it reminded me, I'm like, my God, this is like the scientific explanation for my painting, because it's white in the center and it has some colors. It looks like a promise. And I thought, like, how great would it be to hang them together? And I looked at the Mary Chase, but I was looking at them. It was more aspirational to me because he could paint, and with Hoffman, I just feel like it's just a more accessible figure. And I like that he was a professor.
Yeah.
My parents are both were both university professors. So I have like a respect for that. So that explains that, I think.
Right. Thank
Yeah.
you. I want to go back to Jeremy and talking about land appropriation and who occupies the land, who is in the picture also, right? So obviously William Murray Chase created his own world, whether it was all real or not, but he created that world out here. And in a way, you're also creating your world in that you often put yourself in your work. And there's a work out there that is yours that was chosen by Hank Willis Thomas, and it's The Interment of Pocahontas. That's part of our collection, and you appear there like 10 or 12 times. So can you talk a little bit about that practice of having yourself including yourself in the image?
Oh, absolutely. And I also love Hank Willis Thomas and all the work that he does, in addition to Four Freedoms and their monument project. I took part in that. And I love Hank because he has such an amazing career. He's so well known, and yet he continues to uplift the next generation of artists. You totally don't have to do that. Just look out for you and your family and proceed. But he's just making all the connections. But when it comes to the way I approach photography, that's my main medium. And I wish I was a painter, so I'm looking at all the slides and looking at all the talent and ways that you can approach it. But that wasn't really for me. I wasn't really a master in the concept. I didn't love the emulsion, the smells, the messiness, the clothes getting ruined. And I didn't really have the space at where I was working. And so using photography, it just gives you potential, the same potential. And so I do a lot of work with post-production. It allows you to pretty much work to the same point. So you're looking at the world and you're trying to narrow it down to something like a painting. So how do you combine elements, almost like paper collage? And though I look a lot at Anthony Goicola, who's another contemporary photographer and artist. I think he's based in the city, but he does a lot of self-portraiture as well, showing himself in childhood, in his adult years, and really just the idea of like how far can you push this medium past illusion, past the limitations that we all impose on photography. So it's just the idea of seeing what you can do with that medium.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting how your environment does influence how you work, right? I mean, either the size of the space or where it is located. And I often see that in artists' work. Sam, I'm interested in your choice of Linda Benglis. You talked a little bit about her, but she had a big influence in your life and your work, right? Can you talk a little bit more about what it was in her?
Linda Benglis is one of my favorite artists, and she was a very early influence of mine. And I remember seeing some kind of like video of her making one of her bow pieces when I was pretty young, pre-internet, when we, like the Art 20, like you could get your hands on some Art 21 or any kind of footage of an artist working. It was amazing. And there's this video of her making her bow piece, and it's like a disaster, and it's a freaking mess, but for some reason there's just like this connection to her and her material where there's a controlled chaos to what she's doing. And the chaos isn't an illusion, it is an out of control situation, but she is also directing it and guiding it and sort of letting the material be itself while forming it into what she wants, and it doesn't feel like an accident. And I thought that was just so beautiful and amazing, and she was a real risk taker with materials, and I was always really drawn to that. And then I happened to have a studio visit with her when I was at the Corcoran, and I really connected with her, and then I happened to have another studio visit with her when I was in grad school. And then, by the time she was, I was watching her dog while she was doing other studio visits, and I was talking about moving to New York, and I didn't know what I was going to do, and she was like, "Work for me," and so I got a job. She hired me, and it was a wild ride, but it was short. But just like I don't know, it's like it's what happens in the movies. You have a dream person that you admire so much, and then life allows you to have these moments of connections with that person. And then she brought me to this place that I have such a beautiful, close relationship with now. So thank you, Linda.
Yeah, there you go. We all need these mentors in our life.
If I can add also, that's an artist's perspective, because if you take it from a market perspective, they couldn't give those away years ago. Now, somebody took control of that and is given the respect that is due, the work. It was always good.
Right.
And, by the time that you were probably an assistant, in terms of like the art world in general, they weren't talking about her. She probably liked her because she likes the art. You understand what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
Because we're in a moment that our attention span is like that of a chihuahua. You understand? Like as a society.
Yeah.
Really, it's evident.
Yeah.
But then maybe also if she, yes, but also she probably wouldn't have been visiting the Corcoran College of Art and Design in 2000.
True.
If she, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
For my own benefit.
No, but you like the
She's
work.
still, oh no, I love the work, but I'm
You
saying
love the
like,
work.
she, sometimes not having the insane explosive career, like you were saying about Hank, how he always gives back. It's a real choice for artists to continue to go to colleges and have conversations and engage with youth. But for a lot of women artists, it was like they kind of had to.
Still, value-wise,
and,
with you're a different generation, so you guys are smarter. It's true. I ran around Puerto Rico like a little idiot, for years. It's later on that, and I'm trying to give that to my children. By the time someone like you comes on, you know who you are. I found out who I was when I come to New York, and you go to Barney's and you have a guard behind you. I'm like, I guess I'm not welcome. So you guys are smarter. I have hope for the next generation.
we have to. I'm impressed by you, Jeremy. How you're very young and you're already kind of giving back a lot through Moss House. You've built that in very short time, and how does it nourish you as a human being and as an artist?
Well, shout out to my family. They're all here. I think Kelly had to run out, but we have the. Oh yeah. But really, that was the only way we were able to actually accomplish this project. And we're just in our first stages. We're emerging as a space, but everyone from Teen Vogue and the New York Times has come out to cover us, which is amazing, and we're grateful for. We've also had many funders come out and do tremendous work to make our project possible. But it's really the idea that as an artist myself, I love the experience of residency hopping. So before the pandemic, I was going to all over the country, just completing work, having that wonderful experience. Like everyone you meet is an artist. And when the pandemic came, everything was canceled, social distancing. So as a family, we decided, why can't we turn to our own resources and then offer that resource to other people. And so since August 2021, we've had over 25 artists of color come through. They stay for 2 weeks at a time. And I know the value of residencies, but it's also at the same time very hard to describe that to other people, just because it's a model that I always encourage others who have vacant space. There's just so much of it, especially here, but all over the nation, that could be utilized for artists. We're always underfunded. We always need space, and we provide so much, both in terms of life quality and also local economies. So it's just something that we want to do on a small scale and hopefully reverberate from there.
Yeah, it's amazing work that you've been doing. Thank you. I think we can open it up to questions, but before we do so, I want to thank my two assistant curators who are here with us. One is Brianna Hernandez, who is also involved in Mileshausen with Jeremy, so she's wearing many hats. And Caitlin Halloran, who is also here, and they're wonderful, and we put this show together. So it's been a real pleasure. And I also want to thank Olivia Mangini, who organizes the programming. So questions for our artists? Yes?
I just wanted to ask Jeremy, when you're doing your research on the history of the tribe, how far back does documentation go, actually?
I would say we depend a lot on early missionary and colonial records, so maybe 17th century, early to mid 17th century. And then before that, we look to archaeological records. So this is a lot of interpretation. Sometimes it's misreadings. We do need Native people to become archaeologists and anthropologists because of that. So it's a lot of interpretation and putting things together and a lot of patience. But I'm hopeful that AI will help in that process. So I've taken a little bit of a step back from that and hoping we'll get to that next stage where you can feed all the information and it'll sort it out for you.
Well, that's actually a question for all of you. Is AI a topic for you as artists working now?
I work with rocks.
I'm making paintings now. It's like,
So you work with AI as in ancestral intelligence. Okay. Any other questions? Yes.
We came in late, so Mr. Perez, you may have mentioned about your process painting. I read earlier paintings were painted with these like square sponges, where you were kind of adding piece by piece the color and the impression. And I'm wondering if that was a rational choice, a logical choice, an emotional choice to separate yourself from the image, so you had to consciously think about where each stroke, each mark making was going.
I'll start with the sponge thing. Never existed. People write about that because it's okay. You know, I'm not good at explaining things, but it's pieces of paper with the oil paint on the back. Then the paper gets put on top of the canvas, and then with school pencils, I draw the image. Color by color, like a color separation done by eye. You know, machine does it with 4 colors. That's impossible for the human eye. So I end up doing like 20 colors. You know, it's crazy. But, you know, it's important to me, and I think that goes to the center of what my concern is. You know, to survive in New York, you gotta make sure it's about quality and like good painting. And good painting to me is about mark making. If you look at Liechtenstein, he took a loop, looked at the comics, and saw that they were made with little circles, and then went and did that. That's an artist I love because it's about mark making. take Jean-Michel Basquiat. He attacked those canvases, and his mark is unique. It speaks to people. Thomley being like the great master of it. So mark making is at the center for painting. At least for me, it's at the center. Look, if I get away with having a decent subject, great. But, you know, I'm in it for the painting. I'm in it for the compulsion. You know, I'm not all there. I like, you know, I don't like taking vacations. You know, I got the house here. So my family, my children could jump up and down. My wife has like a family, like a vacation, and I could work, you know. I'm doing like something in the south of France this summer, and it's so I can work. It's at my dealer's house, so I can make a show for him there, and my family can have fun. I don't, you know, that's why I work. But the mark making thing is at the center of it, because at the end of the day, trends come back and forth. The art community is fickle at best, and look, we just there's the only thing that seems to me that's respected in general. I'm not saying this about everybody, but it's value. Oh, that, you know, there's $1 million has to be good. I'm interested in mark making. You know, we do this to cheat death. You understand? It's like probably the only hope at some kind of eternity or some peaceful rest in the afterlife. But I never use sponges. It's always been, and I don't use brushes in the process. I don't need to. I get away with it. I can simulate it if I want. But, you know, after you make 100 of them, you get really good at it. So.
Any other questions? No? I want to thank our artists for tonight's conversation. Thank you so much, and thank you for coming out.